Ghost Fleet, Shadows of Andromeda, Prologue, The Vanishing. 100 years ago, the Silent Armada vanished, without a trace, without a word. It was one of the most feared fleets in the galaxy, massive warships armed with weapons capable of annihilating entire planets. But during a fierce conflict with an unknown enemy, the fleet disappeared. It was as if they had been swallowed whole by the vast emptiness of space. Communication went silent. The ships were lost, and for a century no one dared to speak of them again. But now, after an eternity of silence, they've returned. They reappeared, not in the heart of the galaxy where they had once battled, but on the edge of the Andromeda frontier, drifting like forgotten ghosts. No warning, no signal, just the haunting presence of ancient warships in the dark void of space. The scavenger crew of the Gambit received the call. The mission? Investigate. Salvage. But what they found would change everything. The fleet was not abandoned. The crew was not dead. They were waiting, resurrected, changed, and the war they had fought a century ago was not over. The Silent Armada had returned to claim the galaxy, and this time, they were no longer human. Chapter 1. The Call. The cold hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the hull as Captain Saravos stared at the blinking red light on the control panel. The distress signal had come in sharp, clear, and without hesitation. The ship's system had detected it, a pulse of light bouncing across the edge of the Andromeda frontier. Sarah's fingers hovered over the panel, the glowing button that would bring them closer to whatever awaited them. The crew had been on a long, dry spell, their last haul from the isolated gas fields turning out to be nothing more than scrap. They needed a score, a big one. And this was an opportunity. "Is it legitimate?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, but tinged with uncertainty. She'd seen her fair share of false alarms before, distress signals planted by rival ships, or worse, pirates looking to lure in unsuspecting prey. Lennox Reed, the ship's engineer, peered over his console, his brow furrowed. He adjusted the transmission feed, tapping through several encrypted protocols before his eyes narrowed. "It's not a standard signal," he muttered, more to himself than to the crew. "But it's real. It's coming from within the last known location of the Silent Armada." Sarah's gut twisted at the mention of the fleet. The Silent Armada had been the stuff of legend, a fleet of warships that had disappeared a century ago during the Akari War. A century. That was forever. Go. The fleet's disappearance had been the end of a long, bloody conflict, one that had left scars on the galaxy. No one had dared to speak of it since. "Let me get this straight," Talia Joe, known as Ace to everyone on board, said, her voice skeptical. She stood across the cockpit, arms crossed as she watched Sarah. "You're telling me we're gonna go check out a century-old fleet that just happens to send out a distress signal?" Sarah didn't look up. "You got a better idea?" Ace stepped closer, her boots tapping against the floor. "You're out of your mind, Sarah. That fleet was lost. Gone. No survivors, no wreckage. And now it reappears, on the edge of nowhere." Sarah finally turned toward her, meeting Ace's eyes. "We go there, we find out what's going on. If there's salvage, we make it ours. If not, we get the hell out. Simple." Lennox snorted from his station, fingers still flying across the console. "Simple, sure, assuming we don't run into ghosts or worse." Sarah sighed, pushing her dark brown hair back from her face. "We've seen worse, Lennox." "Yeah, well, I'd prefer not to see something that's been dead for 100 years come back to life." Lennox turned his seat toward her. "It doesn't sit right with me. The fleet wasn't just lost, it vanished for a reason." Sarah narrowed her eyes but said nothing. She had to admit, part of her was uneasy too, but the promise of a huge score clouded that feeling. They were desperate, and desperate times called for desperate measures. "We're locked in, Captain," Kira Dejani called from the communications deck, her young face illuminated by the glow of the screens around her. "Coordinates are set. The signal is still active. We can't ignore it." "Then we're going," Sarah said, turning to give the order. She knew there would be no turning back now. They were committed. As she gave the final command to navigate toward the Silent Armada's last known coordinates, she looked out the viewport. Space stretched before them, endless, dark, silent. And somewhere out there, in the cold void of space, was a fleet of dead ships, or so they had been thought. The stars blurred by as the Gambit glided toward its destination, the sleek ship cutting through the void with quiet efficiency. The crew was on edge, but still hopeful. They'd all been in situations where they were certain a mission would turn out to be a bust, only to find treasure beyond their wildest dreams. Today, maybe they would be lucky, or maybe they were heading straight into a trap. Sarah paced back and forth in the cockpit, keeping her mind focused on the task ahead. The team's chatter over the comms was low, mostly technical. Kira was double-checking the sensors. Ace was inspecting her weapons cache, and Lennox kept muttering about the ship's internal systems. "Captain," Kira's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the tense silence. "We're coming up on the fleet's location. There's nothing here. I mean, there's no debris, no remains of battle, nothing. Just nothing." Sarah leaned over the console, eyes squinting at the star chart. She saw it too. A massive patch of empty space where nothing should be. It felt wrong. "This isn't right," Lennox said, standing up from his station and moving toward the control panel. "If this is where the fleet was last reported, then why is there no trace? There should be something, anything." The ship shuddered as it crossed into the coordinates. Suddenly, a flicker of light appeared on the edge of their view. At first, it was subtle, a slight glimmer that could have been a trick of the sensors or something on the outer rim of the ship's range. But then it grew, bright, then brighter until the massive outline of warships came into view. The Silent Armada. The ships were eerily still in the blackness of space, towering like giants frozen in time. Long, jagged, and brutal in design, they seemed like the kind of vessels that could decimate whole star systems. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the scale or the grandeur of the ships. It was the emptiness of it all. The silence. Not a single signal. Not a single life form on the scanners. "We need to be careful," Sarah muttered. "Something's off about this." The Gambit slowly approached one of the nearest ships. Lennox was the first to speak up again, his voice tight with unease. "I've never seen anything like it. The ship's systems are completely offline, but there's still power. Just enough to keep it floating." "Can we dock?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, but it's going to be tricky," Lennox said, tapping furiously on his console. "I'm not sure how stable the ship's docking mechanisms are. It looks like it's been dead for a century. We might have to override the systems manually." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Override it. We're going in." They made the docking attempt. The Gambit slowly maneuvered closer to one of the Silent Armada's warships, carefully approaching its docking bay. As they neared, the ship seemed almost alive. It groaned and creaked in space like it was still a part of something that had been abandoned long ago, but never truly dead. The connection between the two ships was established with a sickening thud, and the airlock hissed as it sealed. "We're in," Sarah said, motioning for the crew to suit up. "Weapons hot. Stay sharp." Inside the Silent Armada, the ship was dark, eerily dark. Shadows filled every corner, and the faintest whisper of wind seemed to carry through the vast hollow halls. Sarah's boots echoed on the metal floors as she led the crew into the heart of the ship. The corridors were long and narrow, lined with what looked like rusted-out panels, but everything still had an otherworldly quality to it. There were signs. Yes, but nothing that screamed imminent collapse. "Anyone else feel like we're walking through a tomb?" Ace muttered, her voice low but edged with tension. "Stay focused," Sarah replied. "We're here for salvage, nothing more." They moved deeper into the ship, passing through several locked doors until they came to a central control room. It was covered in thick layers of dust, but something in the air felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. Lennox stepped forward, checking the terminals. "These systems are old, but they're still functional. Just barely." Sarah nodded, but her gaze kept flicking toward the far corner of the room. Something about the darkness seemed to shift there. something alive. And then they heard it, a low growl, faint, but unmistakable. Chapter 2. First contact. The growl echoed through the darkness of the abandoned warship, sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. It was low, guttural, and utterly out of place in the eerie silence of the Silent Armada. She motioned for the crew to freeze, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her sidearm. Talia Ace Joe shifted silently behind her eyes scanning the room, but her fingers hovered near the grips of her twin plasma pistols. Lennox, the ship's engineer, kept his hands raised slightly, as though to say he wasn't reaching for a weapon. Yet, the eerie hum of the ship's distant power systems was the only sound beyond their own breaths. Anyone else hear that? Ace whispered. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, but she kept her voice level. Yeah, stay sharp. It could be a trapped animal, something left behind when the fleet disappeared. I don't like this, Lennox muttered under his breath. We're too deep in now. We need to find a way to get answers and get out before... What? Sarah thought. The word dead hung in the air. The crew of the Silent Armada hadn't been dead for a century. Whatever was left on this ship, it wasn't what they'd expected. The growl sounded again. This time, louder. It came from the far side of the room, at the entrance to a long, shadowed corridor leading deeper into the ship. The faintest movement, a flicker of something massive shifting just out of sight, told them more than anything that this wasn't some random animal. No wild creature had the ability to move like that. Sarah held up a hand, signaling the team to stay quiet. Her mind raced. The crew had no idea what had been done to the original inhabitants of the fleet, but they needed to figure it out before they ended up as fresh meat. The eerie nature of this ship, the way it seemed to breathe, to feel alive, felt wrong. As though the very soul of the ship was twisted. With her sidearm gripped tightly, Sarah slowly moved toward the corridor where the sound had come from. The others followed, each step measured, each breath shallow. Their weapons were raised, eyes, darting left and right, waiting for any sign of movement. The corridor stretched ahead in a vast curve, its ceiling high, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them. The metal walls, though weathered with age and neglect, still held their formidable strength, but there was something off about the air, the pressure, the tension. It was as though the walls themselves were watching. Sarah's hand hovered over her comm link. Stay in contact. If you find anything at all, let me know. Ace gave a quick nod. Got it. I'll take the left side. Lennox and Kira fell in behind her, moving quietly. Sarah led the charge, walking slowly, almost as if she was testing the ship's pulse. Every step felt like it echoed, every breath louder than the last. They came to a junction, and the growl resounded again, much closer now, followed by a scraping noise. It was something metallic, a harsh, jarring sound that grated against their nerves. Ready yourselves, Sarah warned. They rounded the corner. The sight before them was not what they had expected. It wasn't a beast, nor was it a trap. What stood before them were figures, hunched and twisted, their bodies unnaturally contorted, skin stretched tight over bone, glowing faintly in the dark. At first glance, they looked like monsters, grotesque versions of the ship's crew. Their limbs were augmented, enhanced, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hue filled with an eerie red light. Sarah's heart raced, but she couldn't let fear take hold. The crew, now standing frozen in place, instinctively raised their weapons. But it was Ace who spoke first, breaking the silence with a cold, calculating tone. What the hell are these things? The figures made no response. Instead, they just stood there, watching as though they were waiting for something. Someone. One of the figures stepped forward, its legs twisting unnaturally as it moved, the metal joints creaking with each stride. The other crew members instinctively took a step back, weapons raised, but Sarah held up a hand. No shots unless we're attacked. Let's see what they want. The figure stopped in front of them, its head tilting to one side. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, serrated teeth. But there was no growl, no vocalization. Instead, the voice that emerged was a cold, mechanical rasp, as though the being wasn't speaking with its own voice, but rather through some alien medium. You are not of the Armada. The words were chilling, mechanical in their delivery, but also filled with an undeniable sense of recognition. The figure's glowing eyes seemed to narrow as it scanned the crew, lingering on Sarah as if it were attempting to identify them. No, we're not, Sarah replied carefully, her voice even but tinged with uncertainty. We're here for salvage. We need answers. Where are the rest of your crew? The figure's head tilted the other way, as though considering her words. It took a long moment before it responded. The crew has been changed. The voice crackled, distorted. We are the Armada. We are the war. Sarah's stomach turned. The words weren't just cryptic, they were a warning. Changed? Lennox asked, his voice shaky but curious. What does that mean? You were human once? For a moment, the figure was silent. Then it moved slightly, its body shifting with a grinding noise that made Sarah wince. It spoke again, its voice darker this time. We are the vessel. We are the weapon. We are the resurrected. Sarah felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. This wasn't just a ship lost in space. This wasn't just a battle of the past trying to reclaim what it had lost. This was something much more terrifying. Resurrected? Kira echoed, her voice barely a whisper. The figure raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at Sarah. You will serve the Armada. You will fight the war. The word sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She stepped back, raising her sidearm. A defensive stance. The others did the same, ready to fire if necessary. But the figure seemed unfazed, its body not moving, not reacting to the tension in the air. What does that mean? Sarah demanded, her voice cold. We're not interested in fighting your war. The figure took another step closer, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. There was something in the gaze, an unsettling intelligence, an awareness that was far beyond what should have been possible for a creature that had been dead for so long. You are already part of it. Sarah's grip on her weapon tightened. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, the silence growing suffocating. What had they stumbled into? We need to get out of here, Ace said, her voice sharp, her fingers twitching near her pistols. These things are freaking me out. Sarah glanced at her crew. Every muscle in her body screamed to turn and flee, but she couldn't leave without answers. There was something more here, a puzzle that needed solving. You heard it, Sarah said, her tone low but commanding. They're not human anymore, and they're not alone. The figure stepped forward again, this time raising its hand in a slow, deliberate motion. As it did, the air around them seemed to shimmer and the lights in the room flickered as if something was awakening, something deep within the Silent Armada. Suddenly, a violent crash echoed through the ship, followed by a series of rapid mechanical sounds. The walls began to hum with an energy that felt both alien and hostile. Get back to the ship, Sarah shouted, turning sharply. The team didn't hesitate. They bolted toward the nearest exit, weapons raised, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Behind them, the figures didn't move. Not yet. But Sarah knew they were being watched. They were being herded. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Past. The metal walls of the Silent Armada groaned ominously as Sarah and her crew sprinted back to the airlock, their footsteps echoing in the dead silence that followed their encounter. Behind them, the faint sounds of the resurrected crew stirred in the depths of the ship. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of unknown danger pressing down on them like a suffocating blanket. "Move it!" Sarah shouted, her voice edged with urgency. She was at the front of the pack, pushing her crew toward the airlock. But even as she moved, her mind raced with questions. What had they stumbled onto? What kind of war had the Silent Armada fought? And more importantly, what had resurrected? Its crew, Lennox, trailing behind her, cast a nervous glance over his shoulder. We need to get out of here. Something is waking up on this ship, and I don't think we want to be around when it does. Kira's voice crackled over the comms, her usual calm replaced with palpable fear. I'm not picking up any other ships on the radar. Just static, but it feels like something is watching us, something alive. Ace, ever the pragmatist, was already checking her weapons as they moved, her steps swift but measured. If it's alive, it's coming for us. You don't need to be a tech genius to feel that. We need a plan, now. Sarah nodded sharply, her eyes scanning the shadowed corridors ahead. They were so close, just a few more meters to the airlock. But the oppressive feeling that clung to the ship's cold, sterile walls made her feel as if they were moving through, a living, breathing thing. The sense of being watched, of being followed, gnawed at her. They reached the airlock in a matter of moments. Lennox slammed his hand on the controls, and the airlock door slowly hissed open. The familiar interior of the Gambit gleamed in the dim light, offering the crew a brief sense of relief. Though it was only temporary, they flooded into the ship, the airlock door slamming shut behind them with a resounding thud. "Status report," Sarah ordered, her voice sharp as she wiped the sweat from her forehead. The moment they were aboard, her crew began to fan out, securing the ship and preparing for whatever came next. Lennox moved to the cockpit, already typing commands into the console. "We're clear for now. No sign of anything following us. But..." He paused, furrowing his brow. "The ship's systems are picking up something. It's faint, but there's a signal coming from the Silent Armada, from the very heart of the ship. And it's alive." Sarah exhaled sharply. "Alive. How?" "I'm not sure," Lennox replied, his fingers dancing across the console, eyes glued to the readout. "But I'm detecting activity, almost like the ship itself is responding to our presence." Kira, who had been monitoring the sensors, from her station chimed in. "It's more than just activity. It's a pulse, a signal, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What does it want?" "We don't know yet," Lennox said, turning away from the console. His face was pale, his usual confidence shaken. "But if it's alive, we might be dealing with something more dangerous than we thought." "We need to get answers," Ace said, her voice steady despite the tension. "We can't just sit here and wait for whatever the hell is on that ship to come to us." "Agreed," Sarah replied, her mind already racing. "We're going back, but we're not going in blind. This time we're going to learn what the hell is going on with the Silent Armada, and why it's still alive." The plan the next few hours were a blur of activity, as the crew of the Gambit prepared for their second foray into the Silent Armada. Sarah's mind was focused, calculating, every possible scenario running through her head. The first encounter had been too brief to make any real conclusions, but it had raised far more questions than answers. The ship's power was still limited, just enough to keep the lights flickering and the systems online, but not enough to provide any real confidence that the ship was stable. It was as if something was actively keeping it running, something that didn't belong. "We're not going in without backup," Ace said as she checked her gear. "I want extra ammo, extra explosives, and I'm carrying a plasma grenade just in case we need to take down whatever's waiting for us." Sarah looked at Ace, then at the rest of her crew. "You're right, but our priority is information. If we can get to the heart of the ship and access its mainframe, we can learn more about what's going on here. Whatever this resurrection is, it's tied to the ship's core systems. That's where the answers are." Lennox nodded, his fingers hovering over the ship's console. "I've been scanning the ship's power grid. There's an old reactor core in the center of the ship. It looks like it's still active, but its readings are erratic. If we can reach it, we might be able to access the ship's archives, maybe even bring up a crew log." "And if we can't?" Kira asked, her voice tense. "What happens then?" "We fight," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing. "If they want us as part of their war, we'll make them regret it." The return to the Silent Armada. With their weapons ready and their resolve firm, the crew of the Gambit boarded their shuttle and made their way back to the Silent Armada. The massive warship loomed ahead in the cold void of space, its dark hull an intimidating presence. The distant lights that had flickered when they first docked were gone, and now it seemed like the ship was holding its breath, waiting for their return. The shuttle docked with a soft thud, and Sarah felt a familiar unease settle in her gut. The same sense of wrongness that had gripped her when they first boarded the ship returned with full force. "Stay sharp," Sarah muttered to her crew. "We're going in quiet. We need to avoid any confrontations until we know more." They moved through the darkened halls of the Silent Armada, their footsteps muffled by the thick metal floors. The ship was silent, but there was a hum beneath the silence, a low vibration that seemed to pulse from the walls themselves. It was as if the ship was still alive, as though it could feel their presence and was waiting for them to make a mistake. Ace led the way, her dual plasma pistols at the ready, while Lennox kept a close eye on the ship's systems, his console beeping intermittently. Kira, the youngest member of the crew, remained on high alert, her senses finely tuned to every movement. They reached the core access point within an hour, a massive bay that housed the main reactor. The enormous doors creaked open as they approached, revealing a central chamber that was bathed in a sickly green glow. The reactor, though aged and battered, still hummed with life, its power still coursing through the ship, keeping it alive in some twisted, unnatural way. "Stay here," Sarah ordered, her voice quiet but commanding. "Lennox, you're with me. We need to access the reactor's console and try to pull any data we can. Ace, Kira, cover us." The two women nodded, positioning themselves at the entrances to the room, their weapons trained on the shadows. Lennox and Sarah moved toward the central console, where a large screen flickered to life with a faint static-filled image. The data was scrambled, but Lennox's fingers flew over the controls, trying to make sense of the chaos. "Come on," Lennox muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "Give me something." Suddenly, the console flashed bright red, and a series of encrypted messages flooded the screen. Sarah leaned in, trying to read them. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice tight with urgency. Lennox was already scrolling through the data, his face pale as he read the information. "This is it, Sarah. The ship, it's not just alive, it's been reprogrammed. Some kind of virus took over the systems, changing the crew. They were..." He stopped, his eyes wide. "They were reconstructed, biological and mechanical." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The crew hadn't just been resurrected. They had been changed, transformed into something far more dangerous. And they weren't just soldiers. They were weapons. "It's not a war, Sarah," Lennox continued, his voice shaking. "They're trying to rebuild. The Silent Armada isn't an army anymore, it's a machine, a living weapon." The air around them seemed to shift as the realization sank in. The resurrected crew weren't just soldiers of the past. They were something far more terrifying, bound to the ship, locked into a cycle of endless war. The war had never ended. It had just evolved, and now they were the ones who would fight it. Chapter 4. Into the heart of the Armada. The chamber around them was suffocating in its silence. The pulsing hum of the reactor was the only sound, a constant reminder of the ship's eerie life force that still powered the Silent Armada. The walls seemed to close in as Sarah and her crew stood in the heart of the warship, their bodies tense and ready for whatever would come next. The data on the console flickered as Lennox continued to pull fragments of encrypted information, his face pale, lips set in a tight line. "Lennox," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of urgency. "We need answers. Now, what's the ship's endgame? What is it trying to do?" Lennox took a deep breath, his fingers still flying over the holographic keys. It's complicated, Sarah. The data is fragmented, corrupted in some places, but here, listen to this." He motioned toward the screen where a string of text was coming into focus. The words blinked into clarity. "The resurrection is complete. The war continues. We are weaponized. The Armada shall never surrender." Sarah's heart sank. The war hadn't ended. It had evolved, transformed into something far worse, something far more insidious. They were not soldiers anymore. They were tools, machines of war, reprogrammed and reshaped to fight in an endless cycle of destruction. "Reconstructed?" Kira asked, her voice trembling. "What the hell does that mean? Are they saying they were—" She stopped, as though the thought was too horrifying to articulate. "They were rebuilt," Lennox replied, his voice dark. "From the inside out. The crew of this ship, Sarah, they didn't just die. They were changed. And the ship? It's part of them now. They're not human anymore. They've been melded with the ship itself. The air felt heavier now. The ship had once been a formidable weapon in its own right. But now, it was a weapon. Possessed. A corpse animated by something unnatural. The crew had become extensions of the ship, or perhaps the ship had become an extension of them. Sarah clenched her fists. And the signal? The pulse we're detecting from the core? Lennox's eyes darkened as he scrolled through the data once more. It's not just a signal, it's a call. A call to the crew, to anyone who would listen. The Silent Armada is sending out a beacon, not just for reinforcements, but for new recruits. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't just some abandoned warship drifting through space, forgotten. This was intentional. The crew, or what remained of them, weren't waiting for the war to end. They were waiting to rebuild, to resurrect, to continue the cycle. But they're not human anymore, Ace said, her voice low, almost a whisper. They've been altered, turned into something else, and now they want us to... She paused, struggling to find the right words. To what? Join them? Become part of their war? Sarah's mind raced. She could feel the weight of the eyes. On them, the eyes of the ship itself, watching, waiting, judging. We need to stop this, Sarah said, her voice tight. We need to destroy this call, this beacon. We can't let it spread. If we leave this ship to continue its resurrection, it could find more like us, more victims. It could infect the entire galaxy. She turned toward the rest of her crew. Lennox, you stay here. Try to get the rest of the data from the core, find out everything you can. Ace, Kira, we're going to the communications bay. We're going to shut down that signal. Ace nodded, her expression grim. What if we can't? What if this ship is too far gone? If we can't stop the signal, then we'll make sure no one else can hear it. We'll burn this ship to the ground if we have to, Sarah said, her jaw set with determination. This war ends here. Now. The long walk to the heart. The journey from the reactor to the communications bay felt like a walk into a tomb. The corridors were silent now, the oppressive hum of the ship's power systems all but gone. There were no resurrected crew moving. The shadows, no eyes watching them, just the eerie quiet of an ancient war machine awaiting its next move. Every step Sarah took seemed to echo down the darkened hallways, her boots scraping against the metal floor. The faint glow of the ship's dying lights cast long, stretched shadows across the walls, and the oppressive silence pressed in on her from all sides. It felt as though the ship itself was waiting, holding its breath, ready to spring its trap. The moment they let down their guard, "This place is a damn ghost ship," Kira muttered, her voice shaking slightly. "I swear I can hear things in the walls, like something's still alive in here, and I don't mean the reactor." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was too focused on their mission. The communications bay was just ahead, a massive, sprawling room that housed the ship's most vital systems. It was where the Silent Armada had once issued commands, sent communications to the front lines of its wars. Now, it would be the place where their battle for survival would be decided. The door to the communications bay slid open with a hiss, and the crew stepped inside. The air was thick with static, and the hum of ancient equipment filled the space. But there was something else here, something they hadn't expected. A figure stood in the center of the room. The resurrected crew member was hunched over a console, its back to them. The figure's skin was stretched thin, and metal had fused with its bones, creating a grotesque hybrid of flesh and machine. Its eyes glowed with the same eerie red light Sarah had seen before, but this time, the intensity was even more chilling. This was no mere soldier. This was a captain, a leader of the undead crew. The figure turned slowly, its neck twisting with a sickening crack. For a moment, its eyes locked with Sarah's, and she could see something in them. Recognition. But not the kind of recognition one would expect from a human. It was as though the creature was assessing her, measuring her worth. "You are not of the Armada, but you have come to witness its victory." The voice was ragged, mechanical, as if the creature was still trying to reconcile its past with its present state. Sarah's grip on her weapon tightened, but she didn't flinch. "We're here to end your war." The figure's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it was more of a grimace than anything resembling human emotion. "The war is not over. It is eternal. And you will join us. You will serve the Armada. The resurrection has begun, and now it will never end." Ace raised her weapon, stepping forward. "You've got it wrong. We're not joining anything. We're ending this." The creature took a step forward, its twisted limbs moving with unnatural fluidity. "You cannot stop the resurrection. It has already begun. You are part of it now. You have been marked." Kira stepped back, fear flashing across her face. "Marked? What the hell are you talking about?" "The ship is alive," the creature rasped, its voice almost a whisper now. "And it has chosen you. You are no longer just flesh and blood. You are its vessel. The resurrection is inevitable. All will serve. All will fight." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Not if I can help it." Before the figure could respond, Sarah fired. The blast of the plasma pistol illuminated the room, the force of the shot sending the creature crashing against the wall. But as it hit, it didn't crumple. It reformed, its body shifting, twisting back into shape as though the blast had done nothing at all. The figure grinned, its glowing eyes locked onto Sarah. "You cannot fight the Armada. It is already inside you. Descent into madness." The room trembled as the walls around them seemed to come alive, shifting and groaning, as though the Silent Armada itself was reacting to the assault. The figure didn't move, but its presence was overwhelming, as though it was controlling the very ship. Sarah felt the air grow thick, suffocating. "Get ready," Ace shouted, her weapon raised. "We need to take it down now." But as she fired, something strange happened. The creature's form began to fragment, its body splitting apart into glowing particles that floated in the air like dust, a cascade of energy that seemed to be absorbed by the walls of the ship. It wasn't just the creature that was alive. The Silent Armada itself was conscious, aware, and it was fighting back. And they were running out of time. Chapter 5. The Ghosts of War. The Silent Armada hummed around them, its eerie pulse reverberating through the walls of the communications bay. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as though the entire ship was watching them, waiting, anticipating the next move. The figure that had once been a crew member was now a dissipating cloud of particles, a mass of glowing energy absorbed into the walls of the ship, leaving only the echo of its presence behind. Sarah's heart raced as the room's atmosphere shifted again. The ship was alive. It wasn't just a vessel. It was a conscious being, and they were standing inside its very mind. The strange particles that had been the creature's body seemed to fade into the walls, as if the ship itself was reclaiming what was once human. "We're not fighting a ship anymore," Sarah muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. "We're fighting a sentient weapon, a weapon that's using the crew as its vessels." Ace was scanning the room, her gun still raised, eyes darting around nervously. "This place is messed up," she muttered. "I don't know what we're dealing with here, but we have to shut it down before it's too late." Kira nodded, clutching her sidearm with both hands. "We need to figure out what's keeping the Armada alive, if it's the crew or something else. If the ship can heal itself, we're in deep trouble." Lennox's voice crackled through the comms, breaking the tension for a moment. "Sarah, we've got a problem. The reactor core's been reconfigured. The data I pulled, it's corrupt. But there's something more. I think the ship's actually using a biological matrix. It's feeding off of the crew's remains. The crew didn't die. They were reconstructed." Sarah's stomach churned. "So what? The ship rebuilt them? Turned them into its weapons?" Lennox's voice trembled, even through the comm. "Worse than that. The resurrected crew are more like organic drones. Their minds have been erased, replaced by something programmed. The Silent Armada is using their bodies as shells, controlling them like puppets, turning them into war machines." Sarah clenched her fist around her weapon. "Then the ship is the enemy. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to end this nightmare before it spreads. The path to the heart of darkness. Sierra turned to her crew, the weight of Lennox's words sinking in like a stone in her gut. The Silent Armada wasn't just a haunted ship or a forgotten war vessel. It was alive, a war machine that used its crew's bodies as tools. The Resurrection had gone too far. It had turned the entire ship into a weaponized entity that was far beyond what they could have imagined. "This isn't just about stopping the signal anymore," Sarah said, her voice steady, but sharp with resolve. "We need to find the central core, the heart of this ship. If we can destroy it, we can stop the Resurrection and end the war once and for all." Ace nodded. "Agreed. But we don't know what's waiting for us. We've barely scratched the surface of what this place can do. Whatever's in there could be worse than we're imagining." Kira stepped forward, her face hardened. "Then we'll be ready. We can't stop now." Sarah looked each of them in the eye. "We keep moving. The central core should be in the lower levels of the ship. It's heavily guarded, but we can't afford to waste any time." With their weapons raised and their determination locked in place, the crew of the Gambit moved forward. They navigated the darkened corridors of the Silent Armada, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The ship seemed to be alive in its own right, the walls pulsing with the same eerie hum that had permeated the reactor core. The oppressive atmosphere weighed on them like a physical force, pressing in from every side. As they moved deeper into the ship, they encountered the first signs of the resurrected crew, half-human, half-machine monstrosities patrolling the hallways. Their bodies were broken, twisted, and fused with the ship's technology. They didn't speak, didn't even seem to notice the crew of the Gambit at first. They simply moved, their hollow eyes glowing with the same unnatural light. Sarah motioned for the crew to hold their positions. "Stay silent, let them pass. We don't need to engage unless we have to." The resurrected soldiers shambled past them, their movements jerky and mechanical, the sound of their footsteps rattling through the ship's eerie silence. It was clear that they were no longer human, their once strong bodies now just vessels for the Armada's twisted programming. After what felt like an eternity, the crew moved on, making their way deeper into the ship's belly. With every step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, as though the ship itself were aware of their every movement. Suddenly, a harsh mechanical voice echoed through the ship's comm system, crackling through the speakers. "Intruders detected. Initiating defense protocols." Before Sarah could react, the walls of the corridor shifted, metal panels sliding open to reveal hidden turrets and weapon systems. The air filled with the sound of gunfire, and the crew was forced to take cover, get to cover, Sarah shouted, as she ducked behind a support beam. The sharp crack of plasma blasts tore through the air, and the crew quickly returned fire. Ace, her plasma rifle blazing, shot at the nearest turret, its energy shields flickering before the weapon exploded in a shower of sparks. "I'll keep them busy, keep moving." Sarah and Kira pushed forward, their steps quick and coordinated as they fired at the turrets and resurrected soldiers that suddenly appeared in the halls. The soldiers were relentless, their bodies melding with the ship's technology, their forms becoming more mechanical with each passing second. "We need to move faster," Kira shouted over the din of the firefight. "There's no way we can hold them off for long." Sarah gritted her teeth. "We can't stop now. We've come too far." With Ace covering their rear, Sarah, Kira, and Lennox sprinted through the remaining corridor, their weapons flashing as they gunned down any resurrected crew that crossed their path. The ship seemed to be closing in on them, the walls shifting and warping as if the very heart of the Silent Armada was aware of their intrusion. Finally, they reached the door to the central core. The room beyond was enormous, an industrial complex of shifting metal, glowing energy conduits, and pulsating lights. The core was at the center of the room, a massive construct of machinery and biological matter, fusing together in an unsettling fusion of organic and mechanical elements. Sarah's stomach lurched as she looked at the core. It wasn't just a reactor, it was a living entity, the very heart of the Silent Armada. Pulsing veins of energy crisscrossed its surface, and strange tendrils of metal and flesh spiraled outward from it, as if the ship itself were breathing. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice low and tight. "The heart of the war. The source of it all." But as she spoke, the core began to react. The walls of the room shuddered, and a loud mechanical grinding noise filled the air. From the center of the core, a mass of tentacles shot out, thrashing and writhing, their metallic tips seeking to ensnare them. "It's alive!" Ace shouted as she opened fire, her plasma rifle sending out bursts of energy that crackled against the tendrils. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "We need to destroy it now!" Lennox ran to the console at the edge of the room, his fingers flying over the controls. "I can't access the central system directly. It's too corrupted. We don't have time for that," Sarah barked. "Do whatever you can!" The tentacles lashed out, their movements fast and erratic. They moved with a mind of their own, twisting through the air like serpents. The crew fired at them, trying to keep them at bay. But there were too many to stop. Then, in the heart of the chaos, a voice echoed through the comms. It was a familiar voice, a voice that made Sarah's blood run cold. "You should not have come here, Sarah." It was Captain Valen, or what had once been Captain Valen, the commander of the Silent Armada. His body was no longer human, but a grotesque fusion of flesh and machinery, his face half shrouded in shadows. Sarah gritted her teeth. "Valen, you don't have to do this. We can stop this together." But Valen's expression twisted into a cold smile. "You are already part of the war. You cannot escape. You belong to the Armada." The core's tendrils reached for Sarah, and the ship seemed to come alive, its systems actively resisting their every movement. The Silent Armada had been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to try to stop it. But now, they were trapped. Chapter 6. The echoes of eternity. The room trembled again. The ship seemed to be alive. Or was it alive before? Sarah wasn't sure anymore. The lines between human and machine had blurred to a point where it was impossible to tell who was in control. The tendrils of the Silent Armada writhed before them, twisted metallic limbs cracking the air with every movement. The core pulsed with a malignant energy that filled the room with a hum that vibrated in their very bones. The massive form of Captain Valen, what remained of him, hovered at the center of the chaos, surrounded by the pulsing energy of the core. He wasn't human anymore. He wasn't even alive in the traditional sense. The Silent Armada had claimed him, transformed him into something unrecognizable. He was a grotesque hybrid of man and machine, a living weapon whose only purpose was to see this war through to its bitter, eternal end. "Sarah." The voice rang in her ears again, deeper now, more distorted, as if it came from the very walls themselves. Captain Valen's face was a mass of jagged scars, and his eyes, once so full of command and clarity, were now pools of cold, machine-driven logic. "You shouldn't have come here. You don't understand." His voice, though twisted and metallic, still carried a semblance of the man he had once been. But now it was a mere echo, a whisper of the ghost that still haunted the ship. "Valen." Sarah shouted, her weapon raised. "This isn't you. You don't have to do this. You're not part of this ship. You're not part of this war." He let out a soft chuckle, the sound a cruel mechanical rasp that grated against her nerves. "You are wrong, Sarah. I was never more alive than I am now. This ship, this war, it is all that remains." Before Sarah could react, the tendrils from the core lashed out, striking the ground with a force that shook the very foundation of the ship. The Silent Armada had sensed their defiance, and now it would not relent. Its biological core and mechanical limbs were fusing into a single, impenetrable entity, feeding off the resurrected crew, using them as weapons and vessels for its endless war. Sarah barely managed to dodge one of the tentacles as it snapped through the air, its metallic tips sparking. As it grazed the edge of her armor, she rolled, narrowly avoiding being pinned against the wall. "Sarah, we need to move," Ace shouted, her voice edged with panic. She fired at the tendrils, her plasma rifle crackling with energy, but the tendrils absorbed the blasts, their metallic coating reflecting the shots as though they were nothing. "Keep firing," Sarah ordered, her voice firm despite the dread gnawing at her insides. She opened fire, her blaster streaking against the tentacles as they whipped through the air. But it wasn't enough. For every shot that hit, the tendrils grew stronger, more resilient, more determined to protect the core. The ship was no longer just a machine. It was a living entity, and it was fighting back. "We need to destroy the core," Kira yelled, ducking as a wave of plasma fire ricocheted off the walls. Sarah nodded. She knew that there was only one way to end this nightmare. They had to destroy the central core, the heart of the Silent Armada. If they didn't, the war would continue forever. The resurrected crew, now trapped in the ship's thrall, would continue to fight an eternal battle, mindlessly feeding into the ship's monstrous mechanisms. But the core was alive, and its defenses were nearly impenetrable. "Lennox," Sarah shouted. "Can you shut down the core? Disrupt its power source?" Lennox was at the console, his fingers moving frantically over the holographic controls. Sweat dripped down his forehead, his face pale as he fought to bypass the security. "Protocols. I'm trying, but the ship's AI it's like it's fighting me, Sarah. It's alive. It's adapting to everything I try." The core itself was an enigma, an amalgamation of flesh, metal, and technology, a perfect fusion of organic and mechanical that seemed to transcend both. It was not just a power source. It was a conscious entity, evolving with every moment, anticipating their every move. Captain Valen stood at the center of the chaos, his mechanical eyes glowing red with malevolent glee. He was no longer human. He was a puppet of the ship, his every movement controlled by the Silent Armada's insidious programming. And yet, somewhere in the depths of his existence, a fragment of the man he had been remained, taunting Sarah. "You cannot stop it, Sarah. This is the future. The Silent Armada is eternal. It cannot be destroyed. It has already taken you." His words cut through her like a blade. The ship was alive, and it was feeding on their fear, on their doubt. It was testing them, pushing them to the edge of their limits. But Sarah wouldn't give up. She couldn't. "We will stop this, Valen. We will end this war." The room seemed to quiver as the tendrils lashed toward her, faster than before, their energy more intense. Sarah ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding being impaled. The walls cracked as the ship reacted to their defiance, its energy building toward some unknown climax. Sarah's eyes fell on the central core, the massive, pulsating heart of the Silent Armada. It was a grotesque living thing. It needed to be destroyed. "Ace, Kira, get to the core," Sarah commanded. "We'll hold off the reinforcements." "No," Kira shouted. "The tendrils will—" "I know," Sarah snapped, cutting her off. "But we don't have a choice. We're out of time." Without waiting for a response, Sarah took a deep breath and charged toward the core. The tendrils were everywhere, reaching out for her, trying to stop her. But she fought through them, her blaster raised high, firing at whatever came closest. Each shot connected, each shot reverberated through the ship, but they were barely scratching the surface of the Silent Armada's defenses. Meanwhile, Ace and Kira flanked her, moving quickly toward the central core, each of them dodging the lash of metal tendrils and attacking with precision. The core itself pulsed in response, thrumming with energy, a living, breathing entity that sought to devour them whole. Lennox, still working at the console, called out to them, "I've found a weakness in the core. If you can overload the power conduits, we can cause a cascade failure. Everything will implode. But you'll need to get close enough to die," Ace shouted over the comms. "Not exactly my idea of a good time. It's the only shot we've got," Sarah called back, her voice strained. She turned back to the core, her pulse racing as the tendrils began to close in around them. "Do it, Lennox!" The Silent Armada's wrath had been unleashed. Its tendrils, its defenses, and its unrelenting resurrected crew were all designed to ensure its eternal war would never cease. But this was their last chance. The final stand. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted toward the core, dodging and weaving between the snapping tendrils. Ace and Kira were right behind her, weapons raised, their eyes full of determination. The air crackled with tension. The Silent Armada was shifting, adapting. It could feel them getting closer to the heart. "You can't do this, Sarah." The voice of Captain Valen reverberated through the ship, his words dark and cold. "You're already part of us. You'll never escape." Sarah pushed the voice to the back of her mind. This was no longer about Valen. This was about the future. The future of everyone, the entire galaxy. If she failed, if they failed, this war would never end. The Silent Armada would spread its corruption across the stars. She reached the core, her hands trembling as she moved toward the power conduits. The energy was almost unbearable, the air buzzing with an unnatural hum that seemed to pulse in time with her heart. This was it. She had to make it count. With a determined cry, Sarah slammed her hand down onto the console, initiating the overload sequence. A deep rumble echoed through the ship as the power began to fluctuate, the core itself responding to the destabilization. But something was wrong. The Silent Armada was fighting back. The core's energy flared, and the walls began to buckle under. "The strain, we need to finish it now," Sarah shouted to her team. The countdown had begun. Chapter 7. Collapse of Eternity. The ship was shaking, quivering like a living thing, its metal walls groaning under the strain. Every inch of the Silent Armada was resisting them. The tendrils flared with greater intensity, each one growing more erratic and more destructive with every passing moment. The core, the beating heart of the vessel, was alive in a way that defied logic. It pulsed like a swollen artery, its energy crackling and shifting, as if the ship were aware of their every move. Sarah's breath came in short bursts as she crouched behind a metal pillar, the energy from the core threatening to fry her circuits. With each shockwave, she could hear the sound of Ace and Kira firing at the advancing tendrils, their shots cutting through the air with a searing brightness. "We can't hold out much longer," Ace shouted, her voice a mix of anger and desperation, as she ducked beneath the wave of a glowing, snapping tendril. "Get to the power conduits," Sarah ordered, clutching her blaster tighter. The hum of the core was deafening now, a low thrumming sound that seemed to be syncing with the beat of her heart. "Lennox, how much time do we have?" Lennox's voice crackled. Through the comms, his tone urgent. "Not much, the overload is getting unstable. If you don't shut it down soon, the entire system will collapse. You will be caught in the event horizon." Sarah didn't need to hear the rest. The event horizon, the point of no return. If the core went critical, it would take everything with it, her crew, the Silent Armada, and any chance at ending this. Nightmare. But if they couldn't shut it down, then the eternal war would continue forever. They would all be consumed by it. "We can't let that happen," she muttered under her breath, pushing herself off the pillar and moving toward the core. The others followed, their footsteps heavy with urgency. The Silent Armada was now awake, fully aware of their presence. The walls around them shifted with ominous groans, and the ship's once imposing structure now felt like an ancient creature shifting in its death throes. The war machines, once cold and lifeless, were now mobilized, resurrected. Crew members charged at them with an eerie determination. "I'll keep them off your backs," Ace shouted, aiming her plasma rifle at the advancing soldiers. Her shots rang out, a flash of light illuminating the darkened hall. One of the resurrected soldiers dropped, its body collapsing to the ground, but more kept coming, relentless. Sarah pushed forward, her mind racing. The core was just ahead. She could see the energy conduits flickering in and out of existence, tendrils of power winding around them like an artificial nervous system. The ship was fighting back with everything it had. But she couldn't stop, now. Not when they were this close. "Keep moving," Sarah urged as they neared the central structure of the core. It loomed over them, vast and intimidating, like an alien god waiting to be appeased. The core's energy was palpable, and with each step closer, Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "You're too late." The voice that echoed through the comms sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It was Valen again, his voice distorted, guttural, but unmistakably his. "You cannot stop what has already begun." The words echoed in her mind, and for a moment, she felt doubt creep in. Was it true? Was it too late to stop this eternal cycle of destruction? Was she and her crew already too far? Gone? Sarah shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. No, we're not giving up. She turned to Kira, who was beside her, her expression hard and determined. Get ready. Lennox said we need to overload the conduits. Then we get the hell out of here. Kira nodded grimly, raising her weapon. Ready when you are. Sarah reached the control panel, her fingers flying over the glowing keys, trying to activate the sequence. But something was wrong. The system was fighting back, the code shifting and changing with each keystroke. It was as if the Silent Armada had anticipated this, had already prepared for them to try and disrupt the core. Every attempt to access the power grid was blocked, encrypted at a level far beyond their capabilities. The core won't let us in. Lennox's voice was strained, his frustration apparent. It's too embedded in the system. It's almost like it's aware. Sarah's heart dropped. If they couldn't access the core directly, they would never be able to disable the power conduits. And if they didn't stop it, the overload would take everything down with it. Their ship, the Silent Armada, and the lives of the entire crew. The pulse of the core throbbed with growing intensity. It was as though the ship was growing more desperate by the second. The lights flickered, and the hum turned into a roar, a symphony of chaos. The walls around them seemed to breathe, shifting in time with the pulse and the sound of the Resurrected. Crew charging toward them became louder and more chaotic. We're running out of time. Kira's voice was tight with panic, but she was still focused, moving around the room, her eyes scanning for a way in. We have one last shot. Sarah's voice was low, but firm. Lennox, there's a control room above us. Can you access it from there? I'll try. Lennox didn't hesitate. His voice cut out for a moment, then crackled back into life. I've accessed a secondary control channel. There's a manual override on the upper platform, near the core's power conduits. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Risky is my middle name. Kira shot her a look, but Sarah could see the small, wry smile on her face, despite the desperation in her eyes. All right then, Sarah said, her voice growing more commanding. We'll go up. Ace, you stay on the ground and provide support. I've got you covered, Ace responded, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. But don't take too long. This place is coming apart. Sarah, Kira, and Lennox moved quickly, using the central core's platform as their path upward. The walls continued to tremble, the ship's inner workings screeching as though it were alive and dying simultaneously. The resurrected crew kept advancing, moving like drones, relentless, unaffected by the passage of time or the damage they were taking. They only had one purpose: to protect the heart of the Silent Armada. Sarah's heart beat faster as they reached the elevated control platform. The control panel in front of her was blinking rapidly, warning them of imminent failure. The sequence for shutting down the power conduit required precise timing and manual intervention. No time for mistakes, she muttered, her fingers flying over the interface. At first it seemed to respond. The light on the panel turned from red to yellow. Progress. But it wasn't enough. Sarah hit a few more keys, but the ship was already fighting back. The hum of the core turned into an almost violent scream, the walls buckling again. I'm not going to make it, Lennox shouted over the comms. It's too much to bypass. It's adapting faster than I can work. Lennox, do it. Anyway, Sarah barked, the urgency clear in her voice. We have no choice. A pulse of light exploded from the center of the core, throwing them backward. Sarah caught herself against the wall, but Kira stumbled, nearly falling to her knees. She managed to regain her balance just in time, grabbing Sarah's arm. That wasn't the manual override, Kira said, her voice tight with confusion. What the hell just happened? Before Sarah could respond, the tendrils of the core lashed out, slamming into the control panel, sparking with dangerous energy. One of the tendrils shot directly for Sarah, its metallic tip gleaming with deadly intent. With lightning speed, Sarah dove to the side, narrowly avoiding being impaled. Then she heard it, a low, mechanical hum that shook the room, the sound of something more powerful than she had ever encountered before. It was as if the Silent Armada had found its true purpose, its final form. The control room's walls were now completely alive with movement. The walls collapsed inward, and the ship's central heart began to surge with energy. It was no longer about survival. It was about destruction. The final countdown had begun. Chapter 8. The last choice. Sarah's vision blurred as the walls around her began to crack. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It was a beast, a sentient, writhing entity, as alive as any creature. It had become the Silent Armada, and it was hungry for destruction. The power that coursed through the walls was like a fever, feverish, intense, impossible to ignore. "We're running out of time." Kira's voice rang in Sarah's ear. There was panic there now, unmistakable in her voice. Her words made Sarah's stomach tighten. The air itself had become thick, pressurized, as if it too was about to collapse. The ship was alive, fighting back with everything it had, every pulse of energy emanating from the heart of the ship. Sarah's heart was racing in her chest, her mind spinning with possibilities, and with fear. The manual override hadn't worked. The conduits were shifting and changing, as though the ship's neural network was actively adapting, refusing to be undone. Lennox's attempts to hack into the system had only made it worse. Each command he entered seemed to trigger a deeper layer of security, a tighter lockdown on the power grid. They were facing an entity that had lived for centuries, a system, built to defend itself from every threat imaginable. She could see it now. The core, once a glowing, almost mystical energy source, had twisted. Its shape was shifting, its original form now an incoherent mess of metal, flesh, and pulsing light. It was as though it were growing, adapting to everything they did, becoming more resilient, more indestructible. There was no simple way to destroy it. There was no quick fix. Her team, Ace, Kira, Lennox, were all fighting their own battles, each trying to stave off the resurrected crew while also looking for any opening to strike. But there was no easy way through. The ship's sentience, its neural systems, had turned against them. They were now inside the belly of the beast, and the Silent Armada would never let them leave. "Sarah, we need to make a decision." Kira's voice came through again, tight with tension. She was standing beside the control panel, looking up at the flickering, unstable energy grid. Her face was pale from exertion, but her eyes were sharp, focused. "I know." Sarah gritted her teeth. "We've come too far. We can't let it end like this." Behind them, Ace fired her plasma rifle at the advancing resurrected crew, the flashes of light illuminating the room in stark, violent bursts. The crew members were mindless drones now. Their organic parts fused to the ship's machinery, twisting and contorting as they sought to neutralize any threat to the Silent Armada's control. They moved like marionettes, their eyes blank, emotionless, part of the machine now, nothing more than pawns in the Armada's war. Lennox was still hunched over the secondary control terminal, his fingers flying over the keys. Sweat dripped from his brow and his body jerked with every shockwave that vibrated through the walls. The very air around them felt electric, alive with the energy of the ship's core. "I'm getting closer," Lennox said, voice strained. "But it's like it's actively trying to stop me. I've breached the firewall, but there's something else inside the system. It's growing. It's alive." Sarah cursed under her breath. Alive. The very thought sent chills down her spine. The Silent Armada wasn't just a machine. It was conscious. It had a mind of its own, one that had been programmed to wage war for eternity. And now it was fighting to protect that war, to keep the cycle going, to keep the resurrected crew from escaping, to keep the galaxy from being free of its madness. "Can we shut it down?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the noise of the ship's rumbling. Lennox looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know. The deeper I go, the more I'm convinced that the core is beyond our control. It's not just power. It's the ship's life force." Sarah swallowed hard, pushing past the dread settling in her stomach. They couldn't stop here. They wouldn't. They couldn't let Valen and his crew's legacy endure in this twisted form. Not like this. They had to finish it. They had to end the Silent Armada's war for good. "Sarah, Her eyes snapped to the central control console. It was flickering, the holographic display showing a countdown that had begun. The ship was preparing to self-destruct. Or was it the Silent Armada's final evolution? The terminal readout was scrambled, a sequence not even Lennox had been able to break into yet. The countdown was accelerating, flashing red in a rapid pulse. "Get away from the core," Lennox shouted, panic rising in his voice. "It's going critical." Sarah's blood ran cold as the sound of a low hum filled the air, reverberating through the walls. It was deep, ominous. The countdown was a warning, not just a signal to them. It was the last stage of the Armada's activation. "We're too late," Kira muttered, her voice a quiet whisper of dread. "The ship's going to overload. The cycle will repeat." Sarah didn't have time to process the weight of her words. The Armada's goal wasn't just war. It was eternal conflict. If the core went critical now, it would destroy everything, and yet the ship might rebuild itself. It would be reborn, an endless loop of destruction. "No," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "We're not giving up." She pushed forward, grabbing a control panel in the center of the room and yanking at the interface. The screens flickered, sparking in front of her. The core's countdown accelerated. They had minutes, maybe seconds, to make a move. But the ship's energy, the Silent Armada's will, was too strong. "Sarah," Lennox shouted, "we can't stop it. We can't stop the core from going critical." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. They had only one option left, one that would require a sacrifice. "We have to do it," she said, her voice resolute. "I'll do it." Kira turned to her, a mix of confusion and fear in her eyes. "What are you talking about? We're not—" "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the panic. "This ship, this core, it's alive. It wants to keep going, but we can break the cycle. We can end this. If we disable the central core, we destroy it. But we have to disconnect the power flow at its heart." Lennox's voice echoed in her ear, desperation clear. "Sarah, if you disconnect the core, you're going to kill the ship. It will collapse, yes, but so will everything within it. You'll be trapped." "I know," she said simply. "I know what I'm doing." Her crew tried to argue, but Sarah's mind was already made up. She was ready to end this. She was prepared to die for it, to ensure the Silent Armada never waged war again. She turned toward the central platform once more, her eyes focused on the glowing heart of the ship, the sickly green pulse of energy surging from it. The ship was in pain. It was fighting back, but it was also dying. And in that moment, Sarah knew what had to be done. It would be the final battle for the crew, and it would be their last choice. Chapter 9. The Final Sacrifice. Sarah stood at the heart of the Silent Armada, her pulse pounding in her ears, a mixture of dread and resolve settling deep in her chest. The countdown continued, its relentless march toward the ship's destruction, echoing through the very walls around her. The ship was groaning, its systems failing, but the core was still alive, its energy shifting and warping, bending to its will, growing stronger with each passing second. It pulsed like a living thing, as if it understood the final choice that was about to be made. Her fingers hovered over the control panel. She could feel the ship's vibrations in the tips of her fingers, the heat of its anger radiating from every surface. The core, once a symbol of power and control, was now an enemy, the last obstacle standing between them and freedom. "Sarah." Kira's voice broke through her thoughts, shaking her out of her reverie. She turned to find her crew, Ace, Kira, Lennox, standing at the ready. Their expressions were grim, faces streaked with sweat, eyes bloodshot from the strain. They were all waiting for her to make a decision. No one else could do it. No one else had the courage or the will to see it through. "Are you sure?" Kira asked, her voice low, barely above a whisper. "Once you disconnect the core, there's no going back. You'll be trapped with it. The ship will collapse around you." Sarah's hand tightened on the control panel, the cold metal surface pressing into her palm. She was no stranger to difficult choices. She had faced death countless times in her career as a scavenger. But this was different. This was a choice that would change everything. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about ending something that had been perpetuating itself for centuries. The Silent Armada was no longer just a warship. It had become a living, breathing force, a war machine so entrenched in its purpose that it would never stop until it had annihilated everything in its path. There was no room for compromise, no middle ground. Either they stopped it now, or the cycle of endless war would continue. "I'm sure," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Her eyes met Kira's, and for a moment, she saw the same resolve in her friend's gaze. "We've come this far, we end this now. We put an end to the war, to the Armada." Kira's eyes softened, a brief moment of understanding passing between them. But then, the reality of what Sarah was about to do settled in. "I'll make sure no one else gets in your way." Sarah nodded, grateful for the support, but knowing that it was the last time she would see her crew members, alive at least. There was no escaping the core once it was disconnected. The ship would collapse. It was a risk, a final gamble, but Sarah was ready. "We've all had our share of scars," Ace chimed in, her voice uncharacteristically somber. "We're not going to let this thing get the better of us. If you need us, we'll hold the line." Lennox, who had been silently working at his terminal, finally spoke, his voice low and laced with concern. "Sarah, the core isn't just a power source. It's a nexus, a point where the ship's consciousness, its AI, is focused. It's not just a machine. It's alive. Disconnecting it will sever the connection between the ship's neural systems, but it will also send a shockwave through its systems. You'll be caught in the aftershocks." Sarah swallowed hard. Lennox was right. Disconnecting the core wasn't just an act of cutting a power line. It was more akin to severing the head of the beast, and it would bring the entire Silent Armada to its knees. "I know the risks," she said quietly, her voice firm. "But we don't have another choice." With that, she turned back to the central control console. The countdown was ticking faster now. Her fingers hovered over the sequence, and the ship's eerie hum seemed to pulse with an unholy anticipation. Each second felt like a lifetime. "Sarah!" Kira called out again, more urgently this time. "You can't—" But Sarah was already moving, her hands flying across the control panel. The holographic display shimmered as she input the final override codes. The ship reacted instantly. A low, angry hum filled the room, the walls reverberating with the sound. The Silent Armada was aware of what she was doing, and it was fighting back with all its might. The tendrils of energy that had been writhing around the core began to lash out like serpents, snapping at anything in their path. Sarah ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding one that grazed her arm. It burned like fire, but she pushed through the pain. She had no choice. She had to keep going. "Hurry, Sarah." Lennox's voice crackled through her earpiece. "I can feel it. The ship's systems are breaking down. The neural pathways are starting to disconnect. But you're close. Just a little longer," she muttered, gritting her teeth. She had to do this. With one final command, she slammed her fist down on the central control panel. The core shuddered. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath. And then, nothing. Sarah froze. The countdown had stopped. The walls of the ship were eerily silent for a split second. The hum of energy that had filled the air faded into an uncomfortable quiet, and for a brief moment, she dared to believe that they had won. But then, the ship shook violently, its walls bending as the power conduits exploded in bursts of bright violet light. The entire room lit up as though the ship had come alive, convulsing under the strain of the loss of its core. A deafening scream filled the air. It was a sound of agony, as though the Silent Armada itself was dying. Its neural network was shutting down. Systems that had once been perfectly synchronized began to unravel. The walls cracked and splintered as the ship's energy backfired. Sarah fell to the ground, gripping the floor to keep herself from being thrown. Her head spun, the bright flashes of light around her blinding. "Sarah!" Kira's voice rang out, panicked. "We need to get out of here. It's going to implode." But Sarah couldn't move. Her body was heavy, as though the weight of the entire ship's destruction was pulling her down. She could hear the distant sounds of explosions echoing through the ship, the shrieks of its malfunctioning systems. She pushed herself up, her legs trembling with the effort. "We need to go. Now." But as she struggled to stand, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The core was still active. It had been severed from the ship's mainframe, but it wasn't dying. It was changing, adapting. "No!" Sarah screamed, stumbling toward the control console once more. The core was pulsing erratically, like a heart struggling to beat. The entire ship's energy systems were still functioning, but they were unstable. The Silent Armada wasn't going to collapse. It was going to rebuild itself. And as the room filled with bright light, the ground shook beneath them, the walls creaking and groaning. The Silent Armada was transforming. "Get out!" Sarah shouted, her voice hoarse with desperation. "Get out of here now!" Kira grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. They didn't have time. They didn't have time to fight it anymore. But Sarah knew one thing for certain. The cycle was never going to end. Chapter 10. Echoes of war. The Silent Armada had failed, but its destruction wasn't a singular event. It was a cataclysmic unraveling, one that threatened to consume everything in its path. The ship's core had been severed, and the walls trembled, with a low hum that reverberated through every surface. But the Armada wasn't simply dying. It was struggling to rebuild itself. Its systems, once perfectly synchronized, now shattered like glass. And in the chaos, Sarah realized the horrifying. The Silent Armada was more than a machine. It was a manifestation of war itself, a force that had transcended its creators. It had become a living, breathing entity. Sarah barely managed to keep her balance as the ship's corridors twisted and buckled. The explosive rumble of failing. Power conduits reverberated from every corner. Sparks flew from ruptured cables, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone. There was no time to wonder about what had happened, or whether they could have done things differently. Escape. That was their only objective now. Kira was already ahead of her, pulling Ace by the arm, urging Lennox to keep moving as the walls groaned ominously, the dark pulse of the ship's core flaring with unpredictable flashes. "We need to get to the hangar. Now!" Kira shouted, her voice a sharp crack over the rumbling. Lennox, his face ashen from the strain of the earlier hack, looked back at Sarah, his expression filled with both awe and fear. You really did it, didn't you?" he said, breathless. "You shut it down, but this warship, it's still alive." "I know," Sarah replied grimly. "But it's not just the ship we're dealing with now. It's the will of the Armada itself. It's trying to adapt, trying to find a way to survive." The others didn't need to hear more. They knew the consequences as well as Sarah did. They ran, tearing down the corridors, the sound of their boots clanging against metal mingling with the unsettling hum of the ship's dying breath. The way ahead was unclear. Part of the ship was disintegrating, and the lights flickered like dying stars. "The hangar's this way," Ace shouted, pulling ahead of the group, her energy renewed by the sudden desperation. Her usual confident swagger was replaced by a cold determination. "We need to get to the shuttles fast, before this whole damn ship collapses in on itself." As they sprinted through the winding hallways, Sarah could feel the walls closing in around them. The ship's pulse was getting stronger again, stronger than before. It wasn't simply the power of the ship coming back online. It was the essence of war itself. It was trying to fix itself, to keep fighting. Sarah's thoughts were jumbled. She had to make sense of what had just happened, what the Armada had become. But there was no time for analysis. All that mattered now was escape. "Incoming!" Lennox shouted, his voice high with alarm. Sarah turned to see a mass of figures emerging from the shadows, and her blood ran cold. The resurrected crew, those who had fused with the ship, were still alive. Their bodies had been irreparably altered, fused with wires, metal, and cybernetic implants. They were still operating on the Armada's mission, survival through destruction. "Move! Move, move!" Kira shouted, shoving Sarah ahead. The sound of clanking armor and the hiss of mechanical limbs filled the air as the resurrected crew surged forward, their eyes glowing with an eerie, cold light. Sarah grabbed Kira's arm, pulling her into a nearby junction. "They're everywhere," she muttered, breathing heavily. The others gathered close. They had no weapons that would make a difference against these warriors, the remnants of a once proud fleet. They were powered by the will of the Armada, bound to its singular purpose, to destroy any who stood in its way. "We need to get to the shuttles," Sarah repeated, the urgency in her voice mounting. "We'll die here if we don't." Lennox nodded, his face pale. "We're not getting out of this alive unless we move now." The group didn't hesitate. They turned and raced toward the nearest exit, the distant sound of footsteps and the metallic clinking of their pursuers growing louder. The hangar was still a few decks away, and they would have to pass through more darkened corridors, now lined with the twisted remains of the crew. The walls seemed to pulse with the same unnatural energy as the core. It was as if the ship itself was alive, fighting back against the intruders. "Over there," Ace shouted, pointing to a distant doorway. It was a hangar bay. The doors were barely hanging on their hinges, sparks flying from the control panel. If they could reach it, there was a chance, a slim one, that they could get to the shuttles in time. But the ship had other plans. As the crew charged toward the hangar, a burst of energy surged from the walls, and the corridor around them lit up with blinding light. For a split second, everything was white, and then the world went black. Sarah woke to the sound of groaning metal. Her ears were ringing, her vision swimming as she slowly lifted her head. The air smelled of burnt ozone and something worse, decay. She could hear voices, muffled, distant. "Sarah?" She blinked and turned toward the sound, her heart leaping in her chest when she saw Kira kneeling beside her. The others were around them, Ace, Lennox, but they weren't in the hangar anymore. They were inside one of the cargo holds, with wounded limbs and shattered consoles strewn about. The blast had thrown them off course, sending them spiraling into the ship's underbelly. "You all right?" Kira asked, helping Sarah to sit up. Her voice was hoarse, but there was something comforting in it. "That was too close." Sarah shook her head, her hand coming to her throbbing temple. "What happened? The blast! The ship—" "It's not over, Sarah," Kira said, her voice filled with quiet urgency. "We've been knocked off course, the hangar's destroyed. We're stuck here." "What?" Sarah glanced around, her eyes darting to the flickering lights above and the twisted machinery littering the floor. "But the shuttles. We have to be—" "The shuttles are gone. That explosion took out the entire section. We're not going anywhere." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They were stranded. "No," she whispered. "This can't be happening." Lennox pulled himself up, his hand pressed against a torn piece of paneling as he steadied himself. "Sarah, we've got more problems than just getting off the ship. The core's power surge. It's not just the ship. It's the crew, too. The Armada. It's changing them." "What do you mean?" Ace demanded, her face flushed with a combination of frustration and fear. "Is it making them stronger?" "No," Lennox said quietly, his voice grim. "It's warping them. They're becoming part of the Armada, like those before them. They're evolving." Sarah's stomach twisted with horror. The Silent Armada had always been a war machine, a tool of destruction. But this was something different. These resurrected souls were no longer human. They were becoming something far worse, a living embodiment of conflict. And it wasn't just the ship that was dying. It was the crew, too, their minds slipping further from reality, becoming warped by the very essence of war. "We have to destroy it," Sarah said, her voice hard, sharp like steel. "We need to shut it down for good, or we're all going to become part of this nightmare." But as the words left her mouth, she knew the truth. It was already too late. The Silent Armada had already won. Chapter 11. The final reckoning, the Silent Armada had become more than a ship. It had become a living, breathing entity, a force of war that could not be stopped, not by conventional means, not by anything the crew had known. The walls around them were crumbling, yet somehow the ship remained eerily intact, its pulse growing louder by the second. Every minute spent on the Silent Armada now felt like an eternity, and time itself seemed to bend under the weight of the conflict. The crew was cornered in the cargo hold, surrounded by the twisted, mutated remnants of the original crew, those who had fused with the ship's systems, who had become part of the Armada's soul. The walls groaned in pain as the ship continued to adapt, the very structure of the Silent Armada shifting as it reacted to the severing of its core. Sarah stood in the center of the room, her hands clenched into fists. There had to be a way out. Beside her, Kira, Ace, and Lennox were huddled together, their faces grim and exhausted, their bodies marked by the physical and mental toll the past hours had taken. They could feel the walls moving, almost like the ship itself was alive. Each creak and groan reverberated through their bones. "We're running out of time," Ace said, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with a quiet desperation. "We've already lost the shuttles, the hangar's gone. There's nowhere left to go." "No," Sarah replied, her voice steady, though a cold knot formed in her stomach. "We still have one option left." "The central hub?" Lennox asked, his eyes narrowing. "Are you sure? That's where the mainframe is, the heart of the ship's AI. If we can access it, we might be able to destroy the last remnants of the core's influence." Sarah's eyes flickered to the others, their faces filled with the same uncertainty that gnawed at her. The thought of heading into the heart of the ship's twisted control systems was terrifying, but it was their only option. If they didn't get there, the ship would continue to grow, to adapt, and they would be swallowed whole by the endless war it had created. "I don't know if we can get there in time," Sarah said, "but it's the only chance we have left. We need to shut down the core's influence completely, or we'll be trapped here forever." Kira looked toward the corridor beyond them, her jaw set in determination. "Let's move then. No more waiting." The crew wasted no time. They had seen enough of the ship to know that there was no escaping it. There was no avoiding the living nightmare that had taken root within its walls. They had to face it head on, one last stand against an enemy that had no face, no heart, just the cold, unrelenting power of war itself. They moved quickly through the corridors, the ship groaning as it shifted and writhed in response to their every step. The walls around them began to twist again, doors closing and lights flickering. The creatures, the mutated crew members, now more machine than human, were still hunting them, still trying to stop them from reaching their objective. They could hear the metallic footsteps behind them, growing closer, the deep guttural sound of their breath coming from the shadows. Suddenly the air grew thick, and the light around them warped, distorting as if the very atmosphere was being twisted by some unseen force. Sarah felt the pressure building in her chest, like something was pushing against her. She grabbed Kira's arm, urging her forward. "They're getting closer," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "We need to move." Faster. They rounded a corner and found themselves at the door leading to the central hub. It was massive, stretching high above them, the door itself covered in jagged metal and wires that seemed to pulse with energy, as though the ship's very heartbeat was coming from within. "This is it," Ace whispered. "If we fail here, it's over." Lennox moved quickly, plugging a small device into the panel next to the door. Sparks flew as the system reacted violently, and a low hum began to fill the air. They could hear the distinct sound of gears grinding and locks disengaging, but the door didn't open. "We're going to have to manually override," Lennox said, looking back at Sarah. "If we can disable the security locks, we might have a chance." Sarah nodded. "Do it." Lennox worked quickly, hacking into the system with precise movements. The pressure was mounting. She could feel it deep in her bones. The mutated crew was closer now. There was no time for mistakes. With a final series of beeps and clicks, Lennox's device emitted a sharp tone, and the door slowly began to creak open. "Now," Sarah barked. They rushed inside, only to be greeted by a sight that would haunt their dreams forever. The central hub was an enormous chamber, filled with neon-lit consoles and sprawling control systems that looked more like the twisted veins of some alien creature than the inner workings of a ship. The core was still visible, floating in the center of the room, a glowing, pulsing mass of energy. But it was different now. The power from the core wasn't just fueling the ship's systems. It was feeding into the very walls and floors, creating a network that stretched out across the entire structure, like the roots of a tree searching for anything to latch onto. The mutated crew was waiting for them. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, their bodies encased in strange biomechanical armor that had merged with their skin. They had become the ship. They were the ship, and they would fight to protect it. "We need to get to the core," Sarah said, her voice low, steady. "Take them down." There was no hesitation. Ace, Kira, and Lennox moved into position, weapons drawn, ready for the final battle. But before they could engage, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "You cannot stop it." Sarah froze. She could feel it. The voice wasn't coming from anywhere around them. It was coming from the ship itself, from the very core they had been trying to shut down. The walls shuddered with the force of its words. "We are the Silent Armada. We are not bound by the limits of flesh. We are the will of war. You cannot kill us. You cannot escape us. You cannot destroy us." The words reverberated in Sarah's chest, filling her with a deep, overwhelming pressure. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she knew the truth. The Armada had become more than a ship. It had become a living force, one that would not stop, until it had consumed everything in its path. Even if they managed to destroy the core, it would never truly be gone. The Armada was a part of the universe now, a part of everything. But Sarah wouldn't give up. Not yet. We'll see about that. She gritted her teeth and moved forward, pulling out the detonator. It was a long shot, the last shot. But it was all they had. The crew fought with everything they had. Explosions filled the air, sending waves of heat and light through the chamber. Metal tore. The mutated crew screamed in agony, but Sarah barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on the core, its pulsing light growing more intense with each passing second. She took a deep breath. With a final decisive press of a button, the detonator exploded. Epilogue. A new dawn. The Silent Armada was no more. But Sarah knew that the battle they had fought was not just about destroying a ship. It was about ending the cycle of destruction that had been born out of conflict. They had faced the essence of war, and they had brought it down. The wreckage of the ship lay scattered across the stars, a broken monument to the war that had raged for centuries. The crew was gone, their bodies and minds consumed by the ship they had once served. Sarah stood on the bridge of the final ship they had escaped in, looking out over the vast emptiness of space. It was over, but the scars remained. The galaxy would never forget the Silent Armada, or the sacrifice it had taken to end its reign of terror. But there was hope now, a new beginning, and Sarah knew, as long as there was breath in her lungs, she would never stop fighting for peace. The end. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.